So I want to just at least begin by thanking everyone. It's a huge conference and a lot is going on. So thank you for making time. I will try and keep it floor open. So please ask me to pause and clarify some of the things that I'll say around technology and liberalism, but especially technology, liberal education, and what I would like to call our falling or at least struggling civic contract, which is the project of preparing citizens equipped with moral and conceptual tools that meet our moment. And every 2 generations or so has had to face such a moment. One of the issues I think in humanities and social sciences broadly is a certain resistance to understanding that something singular or exemplary might be underway, and that there are new things to think about, and also older, more classical, still relevant things to reframe and restructure. It is with that in mind that we set up at the Democracy Institute at Cal Poly Pomona the GIFT program. Stands for Global Inquiries in Freedom and Tyranny. The GIFT program is part of and funded initially by a Master Award grant from the Teagle Foundation, Cornerstone grant. We got $225,000 to build this program bottom up. One of the things about this program is obviously the central and perhaps the most decisive question of our time: how does technology affect thought? And how does technology affect what that Hannah Arendt calls standards of thought? We started to think about technology not recently. It's been also, those of us who know Aristotle down to Heidegger know that humanities have always been fundamentally concerned with technique, with techniques, with manualism. What does it mean to use hands? How does prosthesis work? Those are very, very classical and still very relevant questions. Every 10 years it changes. So when I remember 18 years ago, digital humanities had its first coming, or semi-first coming. And at that point, it was all about how to use word clouds to find out how frequently a certain concept or word was being used. Some pretty interesting papers came out of that. I remember one big thing at that point was civility. And historians of modern and early modern France started doing cloud searches of the word. And decided that it was used profusely between 89 and 1793 and then declined after the Jacobites came to. It was interesting, and it made use of certain digital tools. But the problem with those kinds of techniques are always that they're going to be immediately rendered inadequate to the broader task that we give ourselves, which is preparing citizens, compelling them to think of timeless questions. It is with that in mind that technology became a different kind of a thread for the GIFT program at the Democracy Institute. We decided to use the American Institutions requirement, the upper division American Institutions requirement, take it out of its quasi-American survey format and turn it into a seminar on and around one singular concept, a weighty concept, a controversial concept, a prestigious concept: freedom. Perhaps no other word defines the American condition more decisively, more conflictually than freedom. In fall 23, I launched a pilot called The Faces of Freedom under the American Institutions rubric. Its assessment results convinced us that it had more leg to it. a conversation began with Teagle, and it turned out that built on that pilot, we could not only create a gift program, but a new global justice pathway of 10 seminars. And because it's global, Faces of Freedom in American Institutions requirement is only the gateway seminar to it. And we are now in the process, two of our colleagues from the Gift Core faculty are here. And I hope that they'll speak a little about their own experience. We launched with 8 sections this fall and 5 in the spring. So 13 to 16 simultaneous sections of the Gift flagship seminar will be offered. There's a cap of 30 students. You cannot have more than 30, so that readings and engagement develop in a mode that is commensurate with the word seminar. We do not want to make it a survey. The question immediately, of course, is how do students respond to it? And most importantly, where does the question that this elephant in the room fit in, which is how do you get them to read? Read something past their devices. And the question itself, I have always thought needed a little bit of reformulation because the modes of their engagement with technology changes with the technologies available. 2 years ago, ChatGPT was huge. We were discussing how to grade papers that were using ChatGPT and so on. And now suddenly there's something more. There's more to AI than we thought. The debates keep moving, but our goal, which is the reshaping of American citizenship in an increasingly global world and a perilous planetary context, in which the very existing categories of the human and the machines have blurred, the lines have blurred. How do we get students to think about that? And one of the things I thought worked in the pilot, and we'll hear more from other faculty, but I think one of the early indications are that students respond to text and technology both when you can use one to eliminate the other, rather than make them separate, discrete entities or assessment rubrics. With that in mind, I started to work on 4 fundamental concepts that would allow students to understand what technology does to citizenship and how their reading and engagement with transformative texts can be shaped by technology. And finally, how their understanding of technology itself will be shaped by these transformative texts. What I'll do briefly and slightly schematically, quickly, is go over these 4 points with you all. And then, if there is interest, we can go over the modules of this seminar, the GIFT seminar, and how these questions come out and come into play in the class. Core thinker number 1 is Hannah Arendt. The Origins of Totalitarianism, there was a reason why 2016 made it a bestseller. Why? It's a good question to ask. Giving students, as we were talking yesterday, giving students a moral puzzle. What does a Jewish exile, a woman, who becomes a naturalized American, have to say about totalitarianism in its different forms? And one thing, and one passage from that classic work that I've found endlessly productive in the classroom is this one. 3 core ideas come into play here. Mechanized humanity, that we are able to liquidate entire chunks of humanity or population when the tools are available to us. There was a reason why Nazism became possible in the 30s. There is a reason why Twitter became X in 2020. There is an availability of technical firepower that we will use, as Hannah Arendt says, using majority decision. We will stand by. We will witness it. And through majority decision, like a democracy, she says, we will decide that it might be just better if we liquidate some parts of our fellow citizenry altogether. This mode of thinking about the human in terms so barbaric that only a post-human figure can exemplify or capture it. This kind of blurring of technology and the human is what, not ironically, quite fittingly, I call concentration. Referring to the concentration camps, of course, but also to the idea that that kind of disposability of human beings requires us to pack them in. And I remember the first day in fall 2023, and someone said, oh, like our lower division survey process. And that's when I knew how brutal we were being and what a torture they were going through. Every time we packed them into classes of 200 to teach them Eisenhower, right? There are students who can, perhaps if you're lucky, recite a passage from Tocqueville, but they will not know a passage from Darkwater or Souls of Blackfoot. Dr. Hill is here, and we were talking how there are students who had not heard of James Baldwin other than on TikTok in 2024. And that is where concentration comes into being. We think of technology as something that allows distant and far-flung communication, but actually it also concentrates humanity into an utterly unreflexive whole. And that is the first step towards their superfluity. The students see that. One of the things we always need to, I think, remember, and this has been quite an experience for me, is to how students' perception of themselves shifts as you start to turn text around them. The second is what I would call distraction or dissemination. And each of these concepts, I find it rewarding to run through transformative thinkers that are part of our corpus. One of the things Teagle is very interested in, obviously, is to see how certain texts have stood the test not only of time, but of relevance, how they can illuminate contemporary problems with an awareness of their deep history. Students know that it's a felony to order beloved in some states in the United States right now. You could be charged with a crime. You could be fired in Virginia if you so much as taught beloved, right? And they cannot still put the two and two together at times. Why? Why? Because Toni Morrison is someone whose sense of justice is so impervious to power. It's not your job to educate the oppressor. You're constantly being asked to explain the coordinates of your struggling identity and selfhood. Do not do that. Do not justify to the oppressor what makes you so angry. 2 months ago, joy was not a strategy. The New York Times ran a opinion piece on Kamala Harris's campaign saying joy is not a strategy. This is also something that is an object lesson for us when we teach the civic contract and its utter collapse. The United States Constitution is the only written document that codes and outlines. In fact, it posits the pursuit of happiness as one of 3 inalienable rights. You start with that, and the whole discussion changes. You start with the New York Times opinion piece about joy not being a strategy in a constitutional republic where pursuit of happiness is a right. And they start to see misogyny in a different light. 2 months later, here she is on Fox, and now she's an angry Black woman. To which I'll come when we start, we go over Audre Lorde's essay, The Uses of Anger. But for now, I just find it in the first module, getting students to engage with the question of distraction, right? Distraction is not simply them looking at their tablet. Some of them are on Canvas. Some of them are finishing other assignments. And I don't think it's an affront either to the text or to the teacher when they do that. What it is an affront to, I think, is the kind of knowledge they should be immersed in, right? I do believe that at some point, professors broadly checked out, stopped taking it personally. So that is a good thing, I think, because their lack of attentiveness is caused by multiple factors. And our job through all that tumult is very, very simple, to bring them back to that passage where they learn something about distraction. What is the price of, as James Baldwin would say, what is the price of that ticket? You're creating a meme or a TikTok video in class. What's the price of that distraction? What conceptual tool or vocabulary you lost that your friends gained? And they are not convinced by us, but it's highly likely they'll be persuaded by Toni Morrison. Yeah. So we use the text in that way. We use the text to produce that. The third question of inequality. And this brings us to Hannah Arendt's other core text we use, is the human condition. We don't always understand alienation as something that can be planetary in scope. We think of alienation of labor values in terms of commodities, in terms of use values. But in the opening pages of the human condition, Arendt gives students a very different sense of alienation. What happens when we start to see the earth as a finite mortal whole for the first time, the first space mission? How does that shift our conception of not just inequality, but Earth itself? How does that change our idea of, and this is the word that students use almost like a cliche now, commons? They pick it somewhere, and some were good, some were useful. But as historians of political or moral thought, our task is also to take them to the point of their origin. Not in terms of an origin story, but in terms of the originary alienation. And that is what transformative texts allow us to do. To understand inequality now on a scale that is truly planetary and not just global. And that's the distinction that we try and work through as we get deeper into the question of alienation, more importantly, the question of freedom. What did Marx really mean? A student can ask, what does it really mean? This is very, so you teach them, we have a whole module on rhetoric, on why America is first and foremost a land not of freedom, but of storytelling. Whether it's the Gettysburg Address, whether it's Kennedy, whether it's Reagan, but more fundamentally, most recently, Barack Obama, we'll come to that. And when you tell those kinds of broader stories about America, you realize that America was always a global project. We have an opportunity here with American institutions to tell a global story. Those of us who read Ta-Nehisi Coates' most recently, The Message, there are many things to say about that book, but the remarkable assemblage of these three chapters, one on Senegal, one on South Carolina, and one on Palestine, Middle East, Africa, and the American South. And it's connected, he says, by a single red line of segregation. When you read that global story, students respond differently than they will if they read a page of Michelle Alexander engine book. There is a broadening here that we owe them because of the moment. And that broadening can happen only when we broaden some core concepts from our humanistic lexicon. Alienation is one. And the fourth and final is what I call intensification. the question of selfhood and identity. And this is where I think the civil rights tradition really comes into its own for students. The questions are sometimes not about the efficacy or the usefulness of reading a Du Bois. No student ever asks, oh, why should I read James Baldwin or W. Du Bois? Right? They always ask, why do they feel like this? Right? What is this double consciousness that Du Bois writes about? Why is half of America split in its identity and the other half hyphenated by force? That's the question that they're really, I think, intrigued by, initially not always able to formulate. But when we use a concept that's not already used and abused to death, right? When we say, oh, it's not about self-fashioning, selfhood, the human, it's actually about intensification of certain desires in the face of power, right? The first paragraph of Souls of Black Folk is possibly worth, all of us who have done this in our classrooms know, the first 2 pages of Souls of Black Folk is worth a seminar. It's worth a 15-week seminar. You cannot get over that fact, right? Between the world and me, there's always a hesitation, a slight hesitation. They want to ask me, how do you feel about the Civil War? And the passage ends, I barely utter a word. And the question we ask, thank you so much. The question I ask them to ask is, what does it mean to leave the world without a word? A word. So Du Bois ends that first paragraph by saying, to that question that remains unasked, I seldom utter a word. End of paragraph. What does it mean to leave the world without uttering a word? There's a way that these thinkers have remained not just relevant, but scathing when they highlight for us the American condition. And in the end, American institutions redesign that the GIFT program has undertaken is about telling a different story about identity and violence. We have the GIFT seminar divided into 5 modules, 3 weeks long. So we are a 15-week semester. There are 5 modules. I just want to pause because a monologue is the worst example of how one teaches. I'll pause and we'll go over, quickly, if need be, go over what we actually do. This is, of course, Norman Rockwell's most controversial and relevant artwork. This is Ruby Bridges. What does it mean for a child to walk to school accompanied by not National Guard? She's not Elizabeth Eckford. These are federal marshals. So there's a palpable sense of not just spitting and profanity being thrown at Black students, but a definite physical harm on the horizon for young kids in America. The Problems We All Live By was the name of this work by Rockwell. Rockwell has another great series. Art is very, very fundamental to GIFT at large. We use a few of Rockwell's images in our Common Core lectures where all section students come in to listen to certain kinds of classes, like the class on fear we did together. We also examine towards the end of the seminar the implications of the fact, it's not even a truth, the fact that it has taken us 220 years for a Black artist to draw a presidential portrait. So we discussed Kehinde Wiley's portrait of Barack Obama. I'll come to that. But so this is our first module, the American condition. Each module is divided, has 3 weeks in it, and the core texts proceed along those modular themes. So the American condition has, for example, something on amnesia and the algorithm. How does programming enforce a certain regime of memory and amnesia? Here is where we read Ta-Nehisi Coates's essay, Why Do So Few Blacks Study the Civil War? How did it come to be that the American Civil War is now seen as a battle between two truant brothers? One was a Confederacy fighting to keep slavery alive. That's what Coates calls a mourning without politics. Quote, mourning because it was a tragic affair. Americans fought Americans. More Americans died there than the two world wars combined. And it was brutal and barbaric at times. And in that story of pervasive cruelty, the real story of cruelty is lost, which is chattel slavery. That war was fought to abolish slavery in America. And Baldwin has this remarkable line in Black English, his essay, which is actually a lecture he gives to school children in Detroit, where he says, I have been to the place that the Western world pretends has not happened. I'm talking about the auction block. Including Manhattan, if you go to meatpacking district, 2 blocks of meatpacking is the auction block, forgotten, hidden, erased. And now you cannot find them on Google Maps. So one of the things we do, GIFT is hopefully going to talk more and more with our digital humanities courses, digital research in world history, where students use different kinds of digital tools to map, to create programs and so on. That's our first module where James Baldwin and Ta-Nehisi Coates come in. Our second module is the letter of the law. What does it mean to call America land of laws? This is where we start developing the skill of sort of a humanist and humane interpretation. Last week, for example, students read Sonia Sotomayor's dissent opinion in the affirmative action case. That was Harvard and UNC. We already have seen its effect. This year alone, places not even affected by that initial ruling against UNC and Harvard. Black acceptance rate in college has fallen down by as high as 47%. This is a systematic and very, very constitutional assault on the republic. And that's the paradox here. The assault on freedom in America is often carried out through perfectly constitutional means. That's why we call it the letter of the law. Our key figure here is another Jewish exile, nationalized American thinker. One thing I do want to just say that I often tell students, it's important to remember that political philosophy or moral philosophy or history of political thought has looked the way it does because of a concerted refusal for at least a century to not place women thinkers at the center of these ideas and ideals. It just is. Joyce Clark was the first first Jewish woman, first American nationalized woman to be tenured at Harvard. But you will not, for a number of years, you will not have encountered her anywhere in a history or a political philosophy. She uses literature very profusely, but she also uses constitutional arguments. And I think that interdisciplinarity, that organic way of thinking, has something to do with the fact that all these thinkers are first and foremost thinkers of the South. And South, I say philosophically. There is nothing that Joyce Clark writes about cruelty or liberty that does not pass through the American South. You cannot understand freedom in America without understanding the South. Heck, without going to the South. You do a workshop in Nashville, You're sitting at a diner and you realize why those civil rights activists use diners as their site of action. The delay, the deferral, the inattentiveness is built into how Americans understand time and how time in America is shaped by that long shadow of slavery. That's why Judith Starr can argue rights was their favorite word. And it always fascinates me, rights was their favorite word is often a question I ask, whose favorite word? Whose favorite word? We know as Americans, rights is a good word and we love it. Free speech and, Second Amendment, our favorite. Whose? And it's only in the third and the fourth week you realize that some of them are really reading. And they'll say the slave owners. Because the first sense of rights in America comes from the South, where the slave owners say it's our right to own them as property. And therefore, any infringement by abolitionists or the federal government was seen as an infringement on their liberty itself. That's the history of negative liberty in America. That's the history and therefore the logic that underpins the long history of constitutional violations of rights in America. Right? You don't even have to encourage students, and more often than not, these are now male students who will unprovoked start to write about Roe v. Wade. And I think that's fascinating. It's fascinating how many male students now in their weekly dispatches, which we ask them to do, talk about Roe v. Wade and about negative liberty. How limited it is in its imagination. This was the rhetoric module I was mentioning, understanding the power of words in America. Sometimes a single word or concept can hit that mark. When I was doing the pilot in fall 23, it was just the word dream. Now, another great American word, dream. But King's dream is very different from Reagan's dream, even though Reagan signs the proclamation for MLK Day. And one of the things we forget is how he redacts the entire paragraph of King's speech. We were here before Jefferson. We made cotton king. All gone. In the proclamation, I wait for the shining thing. Right? Redaction is political theory at its best. Why do they redact? And this is Reagan declaring a proclamation, a holiday for MLK. It is in that sense that rhetoric becomes the core piece of how we want the seminar to progress. What do certain words mean? The other word that we've been talking a lot about, faculty, especially in our lunches, is the use of the word lie. Right? Frederick Douglass uses it in the 19th century. We read three major speeches by him, especially in the rhetoric module. Du Bois uses it. King uses it after the Montgomery Summer March. How long can this lie live for? And ultimately, James Baldwin. And over a century and a half of the use of this one concept of lying, a story about America is told. And each of these four stories are very different stories. King is a story of hope. Baldwin is a story of indictment. Du Bois of desolation. And Douglas of some sort of an inkling of constitutional patriotism, which he embraces because he cannot embrace anything else. And that's the story of the American constitutional tradition, and why constitutions are first and foremost rhetorical declarations. They are parts of rhetoric. Jurisprudence comes only after the rhetoric has done its work. We take law to be ontologically stable. And one of the things students love doing, and in this one is where we also assign Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dissenting opinion on the citizens' and in Shelby v. Holder case. about gerrymandering, about voting rights, and so on. For me, and I've spent much of my early career in R1, one of the great things about Cal Poly is how frequently you are surprised by students. You just have to find that textual hook. So this week, yesterday, we did something called Bring Your Own Paragraph. So everyone, whatever text from 8 preceding weeks, they felt like they brought a paragraph each. And over 2 seminars, everyone read out their paragraph and just explained why. And it's amazing that while they did it independently of one another, the paragraphs resonated almost to a degree that felt concerted. And that's what Commons is. Power reading as a democratic exercise. Here's Baldwin of distraction. And this really pleases students. Channel surfing. See, James Baldwin was channel surfing in New York. This comes from, of course, Nothing Personal, which is an entire essay on Baldwin's personal life in New York. And it's called Nothing Personal. There's your moral puzzle. He walks through these skyscrapers and writes about how he feels that they will crush him. How he fears that one morning when at 4 a.m. he will not wake up again and the world will go on. Profoundly personal reflections on mortality, on finitude, on race. And the essay started with Nothing Personal. But this is the one that really works. As excuse and as fuel. To think about that other distraction. Sometimes in order to be able to write, you really have to distract yourself from the conditions of your existence, which is what all humanistic idealism is, right? Forget your salary for a second, right? Forget your scholarship, your dorm, your raw 2-minute noodles. You just think about this moment, right? In utter distract yourself from reality is what Baldwin really is saying, right? And that's what rhetoric does. It gets us to think of the world in an alternate view. No other topic or essay or thinker this semester has generated as much. We are not even in this module yet. This is the final 3 weeks of the semester. But we have a week on liberalism and a week on fear in the 3rd and 4th module. And we see this playing out again and again. America's fear of a Black president. So the essays they read includes, of course, Ta-Nehisi Coates's essay from We Were 8 Years in Power, how it illuminates some long-standing issues of not just our democratic experiment, but issues of trust. How is it that New Zealand, Finland, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh trust women with the highest office of their land? And I tell students, look, very few lifetimes get an opportunity to change the course of history twice. I'm the lucky one. 16 was a disaster for many reasons, and we do that looking at specific thinkers we engage with, including Eddie Glaude Jr., who wrote this fascinating book on James Baldwin, Begin Again. And Eddie Glaude was one of those Black intellectuals who actively encouraged Black voters to withhold their vote from Hillary Clinton. And he came around. And he sees the disaster of that moral fatalism. Right? The fear. Fear can be of many kinds. Baldwin had a fear. The fear that begins us in this module is Du Bois's fear of being a teacher. And I actually wanted to have that thing for us, but I know we are all teachers, we have gone through this. There's no point reading it. It's in dark water where Du Bois writes about walking into a classroom and feeling alone every single time. Those eyes that look at him. they have never been able, he has never been able to tell what they might next ask. It's fear. Being a teacher of liberalism is to live with the liberalism of fear. And that's essentially the connection students seek between moral philosophy and moral life. I think to a large extent, the GIFT program is an attempt to bridge this seeming or artificial division between moral thinking and moral living. To convince our students that one actually creates the other, one actually constitutes the other, and sometimes power, unaccountable power, violence, immune to prosecution, those are not signs of our sovereignty or superiority. They are symptoms of our deepest fear. The liberalism of fear, which is the title of Judith Clark's landmark essay, provides us with a guiding. I'll leave it there because we're end the 5th module, where finally we talk about the question of democratic anger. Another fascinating figure in American letters, Audre Lorde, barely read in political thought. My response to racism is anger. That's the opening line. I think after this point, you don't need to read Frantz Fanon. She just doubles you over. He takes 200 pages to say that. She's right there. Right? And these are students who come to all our classes, so they've read Fanon, they've read Césaire, there is a lot of reading going on in GIFT. We are aiming for 10 seminars so that every single student, which is currently 204 students passing through our 8 sections, and another perhaps 145 next semester, to feel that they can come back to those same instructors and learn something new. There are 2 things students love: a sexy title on their transcript. Let's not kid ourselves. They like that. Employers like that, right? And second, the sense that you, after having given them the insight of their life, will not let them float away. You are there with another thing. They love that. That's also liberal education. They love coming back to you. And I think that faith, that compact between teachers and the taught, is a remarkably egalitarian thing. Because you can't, I can't write anything that I've not already run by students in the seminars. A paragraph on Lorde included. Like, what relationship does she forge here between anger and justice? Here is an answer. She refuses resentment. Anger is not resentment. Resentment is the province of the privileged. Those who can speak in the language of dominant power. Sometimes the resentful don't even speak. And there will always be that undergraduate who will say, yeah, passive aggressive. Yeah, whatever concept works for you, right? Resentment seeds. Anger clarifies. And that's what Lorde is doing here. Telling a new story about American democracy and what it means. Finally, our civil rights thing. I think this is easily the most comprehensible, so we'll save a couple of minutes here. The poster, the image there of Elizabeth Eckford is our mascot for the Democracy Institute itself. So if you go at the website, this is what we actually do. A story of America through people and citizens who walked. And I remember that moment when all of us were gathering this summer for the Summer Institute. And I was like, this is about placemaking. This is about places. This is about getting from point A to point B. There's a reason why all movements of disobedience use the march. Right? You can begin with an anti-war protest march and they'll come alive. Right? Or you can begin with those vigilantes in Florida and Georgia who stock baseball bats in downtown warehouses so that next morning when diners and sit-in activists come in, they're ready. They're ready with baseball. America is a place settled by force. So every language of civil rights is in the end inevitably going to be conducted in the shadow of political violence. That's what we do in the final 3 weeks. We end with a little bit of contemporary scaffolding about government. And more importantly, there's the story of distrust in America. 50% of Americans will still vote for a person who thinks climate change is a hoax or windmills cause cancer and so on and so forth. And these are questions that I find useful hooks for that small patch of attention you have for 50 minutes. That's what we do. We end with Kahinda quoted above. Students often note how there's no red velvet chair like other presidential portraits, how there's no neoclassical architectural pillar or column. Instead, Hawaiian foliage is the diagram. And it is not surprising that it's made by an artist from LA. That's our gift seminar using 4 concepts from contemporary technology and how we try and I took it longer than yes, please.
Could you go back to the previous slide so I can take a picture?
Yes, this one?
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. How can we sign up?
Good. Thank you for that question. And so Teagle has funded the Democracy Institute for what we are calling in our statement the Liberal Strategies Leadership Initiative. Oh, sorry, this was easier this way. See Liberal Strategies Leadership Initiative. We are supposed to be holding at Cal Poly Pomona 3 workshops, 3 successive springs for statewide faculty. We invite you to write, we invite you to find our colleagues. Dr. Hill is there. Hinda is also, these are 2 key core faculty members, experts of Middle East and Africa, who are part of the global curriculum we are designing. One of the things we want to do at LibSLE is bring faculty from all over the state for a 2-day workshop on how to rethink the American institutions requirement, how to turn the survey into a seminar without hurting all those tyrannical enrollment demands,
Right.
and still keep learning alive. So reaching out to us is very easy. And once you do, we will keep in touch and we will follow up with more details about LibSLE, which is happening in spring.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was awesome and inspiring. I'm curious, do you give students opportunities to take this outside of the classroom? So like a service learning or civic engagement component?
Yeah, so we have a dedicated student platform, Student Initiative for Justice, that does a lot of campus canvassing. For example, next month, there is talk of doing a march, a Ruby Bridges, marches and bridges. It will be the anniversary of Ruby Bridges Walk. So they're doing that. There are also poster and showcase events. We have faculty coordinators for each of these things. Syllabus, assessment, curriculum, events. We have specific faculty coordinators, and that's what, 500,000 can do. It can really ease the load that we have about teaching time, about FTEs and so on and so forth. So it allows us, yeah.
Oh, I didn't interrupt.
No,
Thank you so much. I think that it's wonderful. I couldn't agree more about reading and like students making sense of text and bringing everything of who they are to the texts to help us, remake our world. And I just wanted, you mentioned, reading is at the core of this. And there's a new book out. I'm not going to make any money. I just thought it's such a perfect it's about college instructors across the disciplines trying to support reading, even in math, chemistry, biology, whatever, trying to help students make sense of text independently. So this has a coupon code. All proceeds of the book go to
yes,
the
please. Would love that.
Student Emergency Fund at CSU Monterey Bay. So I just wanted to make that
Thank you
connection.
so much. Yes. And this is vital for Teagle. One of the things Teagle emphasizes is how to pull in engineers and STEM majors into reading. And American institutions is actually a dream rubric. Maybe I'm I'm fresher than some of the more senior people in the college. And so I could see what has been striking is the kind of broad faculty enthusiasm and support. That's quite tremendous. Like that's the fuel that drives these programs. Faculty skill, their teaching firepower, but most importantly, their willingness to say, yes, we will take engineers in the class seriously. And sometimes they write brilliant papers. In fact, Teagle has a history of giving large grants to STEM primary institutions. And I've always taught in a polytechnic. I was a Stanford and then I'm at California. It's all STEM. And Teagle loves that thing. So one of the letters of endorsement came from the Dean of Engineering School because they believe, and that's a very important point, they know that beyond the study of engineering and tools and equipment and AI, they need vocabulary. They need to know what the difference is between concentration and intensification. Right? And so the four modalities that we outlined in the beginning of the seminar is meant to pull them in. These are students who have just come out of a thermodynamics class. And when you replace power with force, they respond differently. Right? Those are the trade crafts. Thank you for your question. But I'm happy to hang around and we can talk.